Okay, hi everyone. So welcome to episode 10 of Teh Tarik with Walid, and I am extremely pleased today for a few reasons. One is the first one, obviously, because we are doing some self-promotion. This is our book that will be up hopefully in the next 48 hours in bookstores. So go and get it. And secondly, why I'm excited today is because we have with us one of the legends in the study of Singapore politics, and he's been writing, believe it or not, this book, the first book here, Whether PAP's Dominance, that was in 1991 or 1992, so he's been writing for the longest time, and he is to the study of Singapore politics what Hulk Hogan is to the WWE.
Oh my God.
And what Sylvester Stallone is to Hollywood. So he's Professor Bilveer Singh. So welcome, Prof Singh.
Thank you.
So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. And I just want to give a shout out to Felix, who was our third author.
Yes.
The co-author, and he was also, a lot of you were asking who came out with the title. It was Felix's idea, Unmasking Singapore's 2020 general elections. So without further ado, Prof, so why should they get this book? What are the three main things you want them to get out of this book, or three biggest lessons? So today we have two main motives, right? One is obviously to talk about Singapore politics, the past or the present and the trajectory. Secondly, we want to ensure that this book eventually ends up on the Straits Times bestseller list.
It will. It will.
Okay, all right. So what are the three main things from this book?
I think first thing, thank you for having me. It's really a privilege and honor. A platform of this nature is unique. It speaks volume of what you have done. The more we discuss, the more we talk, I think the better we get, and the deeper we get, and more mature as a society we get, and we get things right. I think I'm really appreciative. I look forward to the 100th program. Today is the 10th, and hopefully we can talk about. Hopefully we will talk about it. So I think so. Congratulations and thank you for having me. That's one. With regard to your query, you know, there are so many things in this book. You can talk in terms of the tactical dimension, or at the strategic level. I would just answer from the strategic level. There are three takeaways as follows. One, I think I spent 40 years teaching political science in Singapore, and teaching a lot on Singapore. One of my preoccupation is I want to see the next generation come up. So this book, very clearly and in a very considered fashion, has actually launched for the next 20 to 30 years. The two writers who are going to be doing a lot of work on Singapore politics.
Hopefully.
No, it's going to be Walid and Felix. So I'm actually very proud in terms of rejuvenation of scholarship in Singapore, and which is very, very important because we should not take that for granted. That's one. Number two, if anyone is interested in contextualizing the 2020 GE in the context of the history of GEs in Singapore, then this book tells the story. Many people will just go straight to 2020 and blah, 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 blah. But this one takes you back to 1948, 1951, 55, 59, all the way to this. So you are actually able to locate the book in a very unique fashion. Number three, politics is about the struggle for power. Politics is about who gets what, when and how. This election was very unique because it was in a crisis. I think for both the contestants, be it the PAP and the opposition, there are valuable lessons to be learned as far as this election was concerned. And I think this book is almost no holds bar in terms of what you can learn, whether you take it to heart or not. And I think the gold nuggets in the books are something worth taking away in terms of how do you want to manage politics in this country in the context of changing political architecture and landscape. Thou shall not take the voters for granted anymore. I think the new normal is that, and this book brings it out very clearly. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the book, and I recommend the book for that reason.
Right, okay, so if we were just to take a look at the, building on what you said, so the first chapter is Singapore's electoral history, understanding the past in the present context. So we go back 40, 50 years, and immediately we jump into the developments towards the election, the build-up, and maybe I just read out some chapters. Chapter 5, the election campaign, issues and strategies. Chapter 6, explaining the results. Chapter 7, the Workers' Party's victories in Hougang, Aljunied and Sengkang and analysis. And Chapter 8, the implications of the GE 2020. So, to build on, you have also written other books, of course, right? So, is the PAP here to stay, which I've been told has sold very well. And also this is a textbook, Understanding Singapore Politics. So, is the PAP here to stay in light of GE 2020? What do you think?
I think it's an excellent question. I think if you want to answer that question, the first thing you must understand is the context. This is one of the few remaining one-party dominant state in the world. In fact, today, after the fall of Barisan Nasional in Malaysia, this is currently the longest standing one-party dominant state in the world, in a non-communist setting.
Right.
The PAP has no challenge today. I think for the next 10 years, it is without challenge. The reason being because of the power and political asymmetry is very clear. People sometimes miss the boat, so to speak, that wow, 2020 was amazing. It's 60%, almost to 40%.
Right.
No, I disagree with that. It's 90% to 10%. The supermajority of the PAP remains unchallenged. But is he here to stay will depend on a number of things. One, how the electorate will see and come to appreciate or not appreciate the handover of power, the 3 to 4, 4 to 5G. I think if you still want to live in the past, then you're going to be in trouble. That's number one. Number two, I think it very much depends on how power is going to be shifted from the 3 to the 4G. It's very critical because the PAP story is simple. It's all about leadership. It's about leadership and it's about leadership. And many of us continue to live in that tradition that we are going to see another Lee Kuan Yew. We're going to see another Lee Kuan Yew.
Right.
And I think that has actually brought a curse to the PAP because people immediately compare. I mean, I've been teaching this for 40 years. Every class, there is LKY in it. That's the second point. So, how the PAP does that, I think is very important. You do it well, you prolong. You
Right.
fail, you short-circuit yourself. Number three, I think it depends very much on what the opposition can and cannot do. The problem with the opposition in Singapore is, I think sometimes they fail to ask the question, what is the raison d'etre? They have this serious illness, which is almost pathological. They have the inability to coalesce and cooperate. So politics is about power, and power is about grabbing power. If you want to bring a party in power for more than 60 years, personalities on your side are irrelevant. You need to talk about how can I actually win the game by strategizing. I mean, every election, they talk about it, but they don't walk the talk. Eventually, you find three-corner fight again and again. In other words, before even the election takes place, the PAP wins. I remember talking to Prof Singh, I said, why you are talking of just 1/3 seats for the WP? He said, let's get real. Let's get real. So I think even Lau Tia Keng talks about it, Pritam talks about it, what more the other parties? So I think the PAP is here to stay for 10 years, but the single most important issue which needs to be watched, and the single important issue which has actually brought others down, is what we call in political science elite fragmentation. So leadership is not just leadership, the ability of the leadership to get its act together within the party. Now this is something which the PEP needs to watch. You get it there wrong, the whole thing will unravel. I think that's the thing which needs to be watched for the next 10 years. That was I started in 1991-92, looking at it. They did a good job, but my reason of explaining why the glue remained, mainly it was because the ability of our founder, Prime Minister, who was the greatest political leader we ever produced, Lee Kuan Yew, to keep the party together. Amazing. Now, is there someone who can replace him as far as that is concerned? I think it's the $6 million question ahead for us.
Right. Okay, so there's a lot in what you just said. So let's deal with, so there are two main parts. One is inability of the opposition, and the other one is leadership transition. Right.
Okay.
So let's explore both things. So the first is, you said there's a pathological inability to coalesce, and we sort of saw that even just a few days ago, right?
Sure.
With Jose Raymond
Yep.
and leaving the party, and it seems from the statement, I don't want to say anything libelous,
Correct.
it seems and it appears from the statement like all is not well within the party, right? Which is why there was I would say a dig at him saying
Yes.
that it's not about personalities. So we know that the opposition has always experienced fragmentation, disunity, splits. But do you think even the term opposition can be a bit of a misnomer, right?
Sure.
Because the WP is not the SPP, for example.
Correct.
Do you think, just to explore this, the WP needs to work with the other parties, or the WP is better off going solo, flying solo?
I think the bigger question to ask is, what is the opposition there for? What is the opposition's function in the unique context of Singapore politics? That's one. Number two, when you look at so many political parties, which I call tier 2 and tier 3, I call PAP is tier 1, Workers' Party is actually division 1.
Okay.
It's not the Premier League,
Right.
It's division 1. But all the others, I think the PSP have done a good job of coming forward, but to me it's still not division 1. It's probably minus 0.5 below, but it's an amazing thing that they come forward. The big question to ask is, why are you there on the political ground? If the answer is I'm there for political decoration, if I'm there because I want to be a personality to be remembered, I stood in XYZ constituency, I lost my deposit, never mind, but I enter into history of having. If that's the real raison d'etre, then I think something is wrong with the whole concept of opposition. But if the concept is, I think we want to create a lot of dynamism in the political system, the more checks and balances, the better. But to start, we need to come together. So if that question is there, then I think the Workers' Party will ask, do I come together, coalesce, cooperate, or I don't? So far, the message is very clear. The WP has not been keen to join the other party.
Right.
And the question is, understandable, why should they?
Yes.
Why
Exactly.
should they? They are already so strong.
Right.
They already have a brand name.
Right.
They have a currency. They have a following. They have an ideology.
Right.
Even we even call them PAP Light, which is to me a compliment.
An
in a way.
endorsement.
An
It's an
endorsement.
endorsement. Right.
So they have arrived.
Right.
If you have arrived, it's not just having arrived. They have been in power since 1981 on and off. No other political party other than the PAP have got that stature. Number two, this is the oldest serving political party, non-PAP, as far as opposition is concerned, 1957.
Right.
And don't forget, the first Prime Minister, quote-unquote, of Singapore, Chief Minister, we
Chief
call
Minister,
him,
right.
but was from WP,
Right.
who became the WP founder.
Right.
So I think the brand of WP is very unique in Singapore's history. Not only in terms of Parliament and LA, Legislative Assembly, they used to run town councils, mayors, and so on and so forth. It's amazing. So to me, why should they? So at the end of the day, I think the incentivization is very clear. And the incentivization cannot strictly be a WP thing. It has to be a holistic thing. That is not found or available in Singapore. And because of that, the PAP's existence as a one-party dominant state will be prolonged.
Right. So because the opposition is too weak in many ways, right?
They are split and they are divided either because of personality or ideology, or the WP, which is primus inter pares among the opposition, just have no incentive to join forces with them.
Right, exactly. Okay, so you mentioned the Premier League, then Division 1 and Division 2. So where is the SDP in that? Division 1 or Division 2?
Division 2, very clearly.
For you, they are nowhere in the same league, nowhere near the same league as the WP.
They are not there for a simple reason. In politics, the proof of the pudding is in the eating.
Right.
You have not been in Parliament since 91. Simple as that. So people are going to ask, yes, this is a have-been political party. So I think they should have worked harder. I think the image of the SDP has improved.
Right.
Chee Soon Juan have mellowed somewhat, and I think have done much better than the past. I think the greatest achievement of the SDP is that they got Professor Paul Tambaya to actually make a difference.
Right.
Just imagine if Professor Paul had been in the WP, what would have done to the WP?
Right.
So I think the SDP has improved, but there is one, the issue of the past. But number two, I think by not being in power for how long now, they have actually lost out to the WP as the party of the day as far as the opposition is concerned. So put it this way, if you talk about who is the governing party in Singapore, you immediately talk PAP. who is the opposition party in Singapore? You immediately want to WP. How many of us will think of the SDP? And in fact now, there's something else. People start thinking, oh, there's the PSP. There's Dr. Tan Cheng Bock. So I think they actually missed something in the way, and they got lost in the pursuit of political power. And which is actually a pity. My sense is, the more you diversify the political environment, I think the richer we get. Because they have a brand name. Don't forget, SDP in 1991, as this blue book talks about, was an amazing phenomenon.
Right.
They captured 3 of the 4 opposition seats. They have never ever been able to come close to it. The worst thing is that they have suffered politically for one reason or another.
Right. Okay. So, interestingly, you mentioned Professor Tambaya, and if he were in the WP. So I asked him that exact same question, and he thinks that if he were in the WP, he still wouldn't have won the seat. And let's just say we agree to disagree on that. I think he would definitely be an MP. Yes. But I guess it makes sense for him to be in the SDP because ideologically he's more aligned.
I agree.
So I guess I agree with you in the sense that the SDP is not there in terms of the numbers, in terms of victories. But in terms of ideological, do you think they are a significant force against the PAP? Because their ideology is very clear, very well defined in opposition to them.
I think among the opposition, it is the most clearly defined. But unfortunately for me, I think it's going to take a long time to gain traction with the voters. I think that's my problem. That's why I'm a little troubled with the SDP because of the way they move in terms of trying to mobilize, talking about Operation Cold Store in a particular fashion, which nationally is not the main issue. So and so on and so forth. They've been doing it again and again. So to me, sometimes I think they try to brand themselves. I don't know whether they believe it or not, but they want to be different. And by being different on an issue which is not going to gain traction, is that politically wise? It's an interesting issue. Compare that with NSP, compare that even with RDU, the latest party on the ground, compare that with PSP or Workers' Party. I mean, the ball game is different. I think Singaporeans are politically very conservative. I mean, that's one thing I come across in the 4 decades of understanding.
You think that is still the case after G8
I think it's still the case in the main. But there are going to be changes on the ground, especially in terms of how the younger generation move forward. But I think there is also a proviso. If there is a crisis and their bread and butter issues, then I think there are going to be far more greater risk takers, whereas in the past they would have thought run to papa. So I think there's a change there. So I think the lack of understanding or failure or not able to appreciate the younger generation is they are not going to think like their parents. I think the parents had this what I call the grateful factor. I think the younger generation feel they're entitled. Hey, I'm entitled, I'm a citizen. You keep telling them you're number one. And all of a sudden you say, hey, how come I lost out to A, B, C? And then you say, hey, married la friend. What are you talking about? So I think then you say we are citizens. Then you say, oh, this is a nation in being or whatever. So I think they get trouble with that. And I think they find a lot of discontinuities as far as that is concerned. But I think on the whole we have done well. But I think we need to also manage the growing, call them educated, call them matured, call them people want a bit of more difference, call them they want a little bit more challenging on the ground. But I think there is a slight change taken. But doesn't mean they're going to support the SDP.
Of course.
That's the point, is it? In fact, my sense is they will go for the opposition and basically WP for the main reason because they are able to see the translation of their protest against the PAP. So to me, it's still largely a protest. And they know the WP is not going to be the government. But if tomorrow the choice is between a PAP government and a WP government, I don't think in the next 10 years people will jump and say, let's go for the WP government. I don't think so. Not yet.
So they are more willing to vote for the WP now because the PAP is nowhere near in danger of the And I think this speaks volume of what the PAP have done. That's why when you ask me, is the PAP here to say, my answer is yes, because of the political asymmetry, and they have done well. But if from now to say 10 years, they start faltering leadership, policies, issues, legitimacy, and so on, then people will say, hey,
you are just becoming a typical third world normal political party, and you have forgotten your roots, forgotten who we are, and you're more interested in the foreigner, more interested. The problem with meritocracy is this. When we start all equal, fine. But after 30 years, those who benefited from meritocracy becomes a class unto itself.
Right.
If that class, I think our friend from NTU talked about that.
Right.
So if that happens, then the unequal dimension becomes a political issue.
Right.
And then the empire will strike back.
Right. Okay. So of course, Prof was referencing Professor Teo Yo Yen's book. This is what inequality looks like.
Yep.
If you haven't read it, please get it. It has sold 34,000 copies.
Yep.
I don't know how, but it has. Okay, one of my favorite books. So now moving on to what you mentioned, and you said that the PAP has done well, right? And people do perceive that, and I think definitely that is true of the first generation, second generation. Even I would say that is largely true of PM Lee and his team.
Sure, it is.
Right? The issue with the PAP having done well, right? A lot of people do not see the 4G as the same PAP as it was, right? And would there be some issues in terms of legitimacy? And if we just look at the 2020 elections, the 4G ministers didn't get as good a result as the 3G ministers. Of course, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, because it was the 4G ministers that were up against the WP mostly.
Exactly.
So, do you think there is some legitimacy issue that the 4G needs to resolve, or do you think it's just a normal transition thing, and as you give them more time, they will be able to regain these votes?
I still believe that the 3G have succeeded in getting the brightest sons and daughters for the 4G.
Okay.
I mean, you look at Heng Swee Keat, Chan Chun Sing, Ong Ye Kung, Janiel Indrani. I mean, I can go on with the list.
Right.
I mean, they are primus inter pares in terms of leaders there. So they've done very, very well. The issue is one, as you rightly pointed out, where they contested. I think if they have contested in other areas, the results would have been different. If you have put the 4G contesting against RDU or MSP, then I think, generally they would have performed much better. I think that's one. Number two, by and large, I think the 3G have not really transferred power. It's still running the show. But wait, and maybe probably for the right reason. Who is there to compete with PM? Who is there to compete with the giant of national politics in Singapore, Dharman? Shanmugam is an amazing politician still. Whether you like him or not, he is the iron of the PAP. And in an environment where there are challenges of all kinds, I think you need people like Shanmugam. You may disagree with his style or whatever, but you remember he personifies something which is amazing. So, and I can go on in terms of that. And so there is a very strong 3G dimension still in politics. Of course, if you want the 4G to grow, they need to get out of the shadow and the sun of the 3G. I suspect the Prime Minister is in a dilemma. If I hand over now in a crisis, which is the most serious crisis we ever have got since, to me, 1963, not even 65, 63. After having captured political power in 63, this is the worst crisis economically, politically, socially, culturally. I think he wants to hang on probably for another 2 years. I don't think he's going to see through until the next G. It will be a major strategic mistake as far as I'm concerned if that happens. And then you will see the 4G grow. The only sad thing then is that the man anointed to take over would have aged. That is Mr. Heng Swee Keat.
Okay.
So I think yes, sometimes it's good for the 3G to do or 4G to do badly. Why? I think they have to work hard to earn the trust, and I think the best signal they got from the public is thou have to work harder. Clear.
Right.
East Coast. Look at the way they are working. Unbelievable. So it's Heng Swee Keat is an amazing political leader, known him for some years now. So I think, and the way he responded to the result is an amazing performance. And there, I literally see his post-GE consequence, quote unquote, of a narrow margin in an amazing fashion. And what is the amazing fashion? Let's reverse this. And what is the reason? Let's learn from this. So in other words, I think they're not very emotional about the whole thing. They know they've got a super majority. There are differences in terms of variation of who got what, when and how. But look, we have won. Now, how do we prevent this from happening again? because the traditional mind was, in a crisis we will win hands down.
Right.
It did not happen. I think it was a good thing. Why is a good thing? When you have a crisis of this nature and the leadership is still compact and strong, you are able to make a mistake.
Right.
Can you imagine if this was happening at a time of weak leadership and terrible crisis? Then it will be a very double whammy, you know. So no, I still think that 4G will do well for a simple reason. Where's the competition? I don't see the competition. I don't see at all. I mean, you put Ong and Chan and Heng and Indrani and Janil and Maliki and Busses on the other side. You think the public will generally go on the other side? I know one day, as Lee Kuan Yew said, that day will come. But I don't think it's at the moment. I think the 4G will see through. The question to me is not 4G. Because we are familiar with the 4G since 2011, generally. The question will be the 5G. To me, I'm more concerned and looking at the 5G. Therefore, I look at 10 years from today. 2030, what will be the shape and color, direction and dimension and dynamics of the PAP? Because that's what this question is all about. With the PAP's dominance. You know, today they are solid. I mean, people sometimes fail to appreciate that 89% control of Parliament is actually absolute control of Parliament. And it gives you a sense of complacency sometimes. Oh, we got 61% only. You got it wrong. In politics, it's not the total vote which counts, it's the parliamentary power, the power to vote a bill in and out. That is more important.
So let's explore this a little bit. By the way, it's already 25 minutes. We have about 15-20 minutes. By the way, I think half of the students, half the people on are from NUS, maybe amongst the students are half from NTU. Those who are from NTU have never been exposed to Prof Singh. This is him. This is how his lectures are. But the humor 10 times, right? This one is a bit, it's a bit serious. So you talk about power being represented in the parliamentary seats rather than the vote share. If I were to give you a scenario, two scenarios, right? If the PAP had to choose between getting 70% of votes but losing 10 seats, as opposed to getting all the seats, losing 0 seats but getting only 51% of the votes, which one do you think they will take? Because I think they would take the 70%, because the 51%, that means they only need a little bit of swing here and there for them to lose completely. So wouldn't the vote share still mean a lot?
I think it would mean, not the way the scenario you have
This is extreme.
I know, it's extreme.
This is extreme.
Nowadays extremism is the norm, is it? So, you see, but I think one day it will arrive. That kind of scenario. So? I mean, just look at the way Barisan National lost power. They lost 2/3 majority.
Slowly.
Then they lost popular vote. Then they even below, they only have 47%, but they still control Parliament.
Correct.
You know? So I think once that stage is reached, the red light is shining. Okay. Then the question would be, how is the PAP going to remain in power? Because you are no longer in a position to stop the veto from the opposition, because you no longer have 2/3 majority. You are no longer free to change rules and regulations. Because don't forget, you know, this brings to another bigger question. Just because you have control 90% or even 70% or say 80%, you have the right power to change rules and regulations as you like. You know, you will say, I can change because I won. But and at the end of the day, you are legal. But then people will ask, are you just? So is POFMA just? So is abortion just? So is casino just?
And then that was a theme of this election, right?
Exactly.
Justice, right? Especially amongst younger voters, or minority voters. I mean, a lot of them were really concerned about the perceived unfairness.
Absolutely, because 2 years prior to that, the whole issue of meritocracy, social inequality, position of foreigner, so all that came to the fore. And then all of a sudden, it became an issue in the midst of the election. It's Reza Khan's. Clearly, you know, I mean that it became personified because of that. And I think the shift in Sengkang happened because of that. Because majority of the voters there were young voters, you know, and majority of the WP team were on the average able to resonate with the voters compared to the other side. So yes, you are right. But I think at the same time, this will happen. I think this is something Mr. Lee Kuan Yew anticipated.
Right.
In 2011 January, he talked about this.
Right.
He said it will happen. So to me, the warning to the PAP, which is a good warning, is that you have to work very hard at it. Don't forget, this is not a God-given right to rule this country.
Right.
One day, things can change, but they will change in the following way. I give you power, make it happen, earn the right to rule.
Right.
But the day you do not make it happen, then you are going to be short-circuited.
Right.
Because what made the difference between our forefathers was they trusted the party because the party did something amazing. I still believe the best PAP's manifesto is the 1959 manifesto. They delivered on jobs, school, housing, security, safety, future. That was the best. That manifesto have never been repeated in many ways because people lived and they saw the PAP talking and walking the manifesto. But since then, people have been growing successfully, developing, unequally maybe, but most people are successful because they compare to where they came from. But today, your children, my children, we don't compare, oh, I'm coming from India, my uncle is still toiling that a half acre of land and this is going to be split between 10 children. We don't talk like that. In fact, it's the other way around. Hey, you may be an ordinary guy, but you can own a 4-room flat.
Right.
And your children are schooling and 2 of them are in the university. Say, I have arrived. So I think that PAP delivered those basic things. Today, suppose Maslow, higher needs.
Right.
That's where we are. So
Right.
I think when we look at that, I think it's good to look at the whole dimension, and then the perspective is important.
Okay, thanks for that. So let's take a couple of audience questions. There's one from Gary, and I have to take one from him. We both have taught him before. So he asked, why was there no flight to safety mindset? Do you want to elaborate on that? What happened? Did things turn during the campaigning and what was perceived to be high-handed tactics, or was there a fundamental apprehension towards the 4G, or what was it? Because I think generally people would, even the Workers' Party has said this, that the government has handled COVID pretty decent.
Yeah.
I think where they dropped the ball was the foreign workers and the
I think
dormitories,
so.
and that was a huge mistake. But other than that, you would say that they've done pretty okay, especially in terms of the death toll. That speaks volumes of their work. So where did they go wrong then?
Gary, thanks for that. I think on the whole, the PAP did very well, whether it was with regard to COVID and then responding to COVID in general, especially looking after Singaporeans. They did par excellence. I think I think it's psychological. I think where they fail, whether you want to use the word fail in the proper sense or
Right.
not, if they had called for an election, say March, April, then people would have really felt the crisis. You call for an election, talking about a crisis, every day crisis. By the time they went to the election, it
was no
gone.
longer a crisis.
People had learned to live with the crisis. They are already talking about it. People already spend the money. What crisis? Where is the crisis? Yeah? Mask, no mask. Social distancing, no social distancing. So in other words, my sense is they failed to mind the crisis. They failed to mind the crisis. If they have done it earlier, look at previous election. The moment the Malaysians and the Indonesians had a military exercise, 2 weeks later there's a general election. Hey, they could have landed on this side of the causeway rather than this. Wow, I just proved.
September 11.
September 11,
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think the time lag was
Right.
something they failed to mind.
That's
And this was
interesting.
why myself and even Eugene Tan and the others, we were calling for an election not in 2020, in 2019. I think the PAP would have done very well because the flight to safety would have happened not because of COVID, but because of the US-China trade war.
Right.
So I think it was the sense that there's no crisis.
Right.
And
So
that
the crisis
allowed them to
mentality
play.
had been already-
So that allowed them to play politics.
Right.
Whether it was 4G or 3G or other issues, and then I think certain aspects of the campaigning played a part, and so on and so forth. But people felt, hey, we are okay. And I think people still felt, look at the opposition. 2 parties from nomination day, from Parliament being dissolved to nomination day, even say, I'm not going to participate. The opposition is giving in. Tan Cheng Bock talk of participating in 40 seats, in the end half of it. Pritam Singh talked about 1/3, eventually how many seats. So you saw the opposition withdrawing its contestation.
And that's interesting as well, because did the opposition also miscalculate ground sentiments then? right? Because the fact that they were withdrawing, probably they were expecting the flight to safety.
I think two things. One, they thought, this is lost.
Right.
Maybe not as badly as 2015,
Right.
because that was Lee Kuan Yew's death.
Yeah.
So it was a different emotion.
Right.
This one, I think people are going to go for the PAP and they're going to do it well.
Right.
So let's save our money for the next election. That kind
Right.
of mentality. And I think number two, I think the fear was no rallies.
Right.
Especially for the WP. No
Right.
rallies. Hey, how are we going to get traction? This social media thing, like what we are doing now, is not going to win the hearts and minds.
Right.
So, but kudos to them. They turned that around. And they did far better than the PAP in terms of using the social media.
Right.
But the PAP benefited from their earlier house to house, all the goodies which they delivered, especially with regard to older citizens. So that only stopped after February, March. So they actually mined from 2015 to about January, February 2020. It has 5 years of investment. They benefited from that.
Right. Correct. I mean, elections don't start on nomination day or
Of course.
the dissolution of parliament. And talking about house visits, one of the things that I've seen now, for instance, the WP has always had a good ground game anyway. But even in East Coast, I see the candidates that lost, they are still going every week, literally weekly. They are going for the visits, and I see that even the SDP, Dr. Chi has adopted a different approach. She's now a local candidate instead of a national candidate. So maybe we see some learning on the part of SDP as well. So there was another question from I don't know who it was, but should we change to a proportional representation system?
I mean, our culture. That debate is not a new one, by the way.
Yeah.
And the PAP will say GRC, NCMP, NMP is a variant of it, which is not. Okay? So should we or should we not? I mean, you can argue till the cows come home whether one is better than the other. My response to the question is, why fix it if it's not broken?
Right.
So why would that be better than the current one?
Right.
My sense is, the whole argument that the GRCs are impenetrable no longer works. My sense is PM Lee will go down into history in terms of downsizing the GRCs and expanding the SMCs. And in the next election, probably you're going to see more GRCs and smaller GRCs and more SMCs. So I think the playing field is going to get level. Number three, I think the quality of opposition could increase, whether you like it or not. And we can see that.
Success breeds success, right? There's going to be more credible candidates who want to serve in the opposition because they're for.
And the next thing is looking at the 4G and some 5G. I think they are going to have a run for their money in the next general election.
Right.
So I think there is no need for me at the moment to change, because this system is about to undergo a massive reshape or rechange or whatever you call it, because I think people are generally comfortable. We Singaporeans are not so, what's the word? We are not revolutionary. We are incrementalists. This will be actually a very big change.
Right.
So I suspect we are going to see this shift slowly and surely, and I think people are going to say, okay, we have got 10% now, next election maybe 12%, 15%, and then if they start to quarrel among themselves, hey, it's going to be 51-49. So things are going to happen.
Right.
So don't take it for granted. So that one depends.
Right. So the questioner was also saying about how it's going to be more reflective of. So if 60% votes for PAP, the PAP will get 60% of the seats. However, what I would say is, don't forget that the electoral system also affects how you vote.
Exactly.
So if it's a proportional representation system, there's no guarantee that the PAP will still get 60. Probably people will become more conservative in their voting.
Exactly.
So there is that psychological effect in the political science literature as well. So it's not a panacea, I think, the proportional representation system, and it comes with a host of other problems as well. But I think that's a debate we can have for another day. But I think that was a good question. I'll just take two more comments, and we only have about 5 more minutes, so we'll have to end. Haikal says that social media won the hearts and minds of the younger voters. Do you think it is as simple as that, or do you think it was missteps by the PAP that won the hearts and minds of, or not won the hearts, and it turned the hearts and minds of younger voters again? So it wasn't a pro-WP vote or pro-opposition, but it was an anti-PAP vote.
I think it was not so much anti as much as a protest in certain areas.
Right,
That's one. Number two, listen, the PAP still won almost 62%.
Right.
They won 90%. So when you say change, my sense is I think the PAP was a little bit complacent in the use of social media, thinking that the crisis will advantage them. And they focus on the old social media, Facebook.
Right.
They lost sight of YouTube, they lost sight of Instagram, and so on and so forth. So I think the opposition was much smarter because they were leveraging on what the younger people were looking and playing with. The tools of the game changed. So it's not a question
but they were still on Facebook, right?
They were on Facebook. Just because Prime Minister got more than 1 million Facebook doesn't mean he's going to win. Why? Because the game changer was somewhere else. And I think whatever he has won, he has won. But where the change took place, with regard to the younger people, to me was this new media, new platform. And I think I agree with the questioner that I think there's an area we need to pay a bit more attention. And this is an area where, one, the opposition did very well. Two, but they did very well when? They did very well in particular during the campaign period. If you look at the quality and the number of hits during this period, it was amazing. I think my students did some research here. It was interesting to look at how certain number of candidates like James, Britain, Nichols here, how they actually went up during this period compared to the traditional political those in power. So there was a change there.
And also when I was looking through the WP candidates, each of them felt like they had their own personality. Whereas when I look at the PAP candidates, I'm sure all of them have their own personalities, but they feel so restrained and constrained. I don't know, in terms of their media appearances, it seems like almost all of them are replaceable with each other. I'm talking about the new ones. And whereas the WP, it seems to me that they were able to harness social media better to make them more relatable to people. That was my impression.
I found the new PAP candidates being bottlenecked by one thing. Humble beginning. And I thought it backfired after a while.
I agree.
It backfired. So if they had tried to show that, yes, I mean, people listen to the first guy, second guy, by the third time, there's a script So then you lost, even though many of them did come from humble background. So whereas the Workers' Party, the way they were dancing around, playing around, so they were much more associated with the people, and they were not formal all the time. I think that was
too formal, the new candidate.
Very formal. So I think the Workers' Party showed that we are part of the people. So in fact, at the end of the day, it's not just Workers' Party; it became People's Action Party on the other side. So I suspect they wanted to prove Vivian Balakrishnan right.
Okay. So second last question. Fairuz asked, there seems to be people have been talking about are there different camps within the PAP, and ultimately it's all speculation. But I guess the most important question: do you think DPM Heng will still be the next PM?
I'm absolutely sure he's the next PM. The simple reason is this: in the Chinese culture, the crown prince is very important. The crown prince is selected by the emperor for a simple reason: he's senior, he's noble, he's able to do the job. Because if he does not, the emperor looks bad, the crown prince looks bad, and it brings about instability and eventually dynastic fall. Simple as that.
So the fact that PMB has committed to it, there's no way that...
I don't think so.
Okay.
The question would be how long? Whether it's 1 term, 2 term.
So that's a separate question.
To me, it's a secondary question.
He
will be the next PM. For the simple reason also, what is his mistake? No mistake. In fact, without him, East Coast would have been lost. Simple as that. So I think he has done well.
Okay. So this is a final question, and a lot of times whenever students of political science will know when they say they study political science, and I say, what do you study? Especially one of the worst things we hear is, in Singapore, what politics is there? I mean, that's obviously not the wisest way to think about Singapore politics. But in general, what is the value of studying political science? And you have been at NUS for 30 plus years, almost 40?
43.
43 years, NUS political science. So what is the value of studying political science?
One, there's politics everywhere. The day you get married, as a son, as a daughter, as a worker, climbing the bus, getting down on the bus, politics is everywhere.
Yes,
it's part of life.
First was marriage, for sure, there's politics in marriage.
That's one. I think number two, what we as political science teachers train you is a creative mind. There's nothing fixed. You are like a cock in an ocean moving around, and your ability to look and measure, weigh, is so critical, and we produce those critical-minded individuals. At the end of the day, you have to make that judgment call, and I think political science trained you to live in an uncertain world, in a highly diversified, complex world, but to be nuanced. I think that's critical.
Right.
How you are nuanced in a difficult environment, that will ensure your success, and that is what PS is all about.
Right. So I'm actually quoting Russell Brand. Now that you mentioned nuance, right? He actually said that tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance. Right? Whenever somebody forces you to have an argument without providing the opportunity to be nuanced, I think that is tyrannical, and hopefully it's through political science, through the social sciences, that we are able to develop these abilities. And somebody asked what's the difference between NTU political science, NTU PPG, and NS political. That's not a question I'm going to answer in front of my mentor.
But one small thing.
I
want to end with this.
Whatever you want.
Whenever as a teacher, as a political scientist, as a Singapore student, you know the task ahead of you is so critical. But what makes you so powerful? What makes you so animate is that you know the power behind you. I mean, I'm a Sikh warrior. We Sikhs are warriors. We all know at the end of the day, I'm going to move forward, hosting a flag, which is red and white, moon and crescent. I'm going to come back with the flag. But if I don't come back hosting the flag, I don't mind coming back wrapped in the flag, but I'm going to come back. And that's what political science teaches you about nation, people, citizenship. That's power.
Wow. I hope you guys are inspired enough to at least read some political science books or subjects, modules if you're still in university. Professor Singh, do you any final words for our young audience? Or?
We need more Walids around, more Felix around. Because the technology is there, the political environment is opened up, the spaces are there. It's up to you to, in a very responsible, nuanced way, to move forward. Don't cry and say, oh, I can't move forward. You can.
Right.
This is the 10th program. I'm looking forward towards the 100th program.
Hopefully.
I want another 100 Walids out there, and this country will be that much richer.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Singh.